Hi, since the pandemic changed the way we work, live, and play, we're spending more than ever on Zoom calls, on video calls. In fact, during the first 4 months of the pandemic, Zoom share price increased by 730%. I wish I put money into Zoom instead of GME at the peak. Now, according to researchers at Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, all of these Zoom calls are actually wearing us out. They're giving us Zoom fatigue. In today's episode, we're going to talk through why all of these Zoom calls give us fatigue, and more importantly, what we can do about it to beat Zoom fatigue. First, if you enjoy this show, take a moment to like, share, or subscribe. But most of all, I'd love to know if you are suffering from Zoom fatigue, what your experience has been over the past 18 or so months. Just leave a comment below. So Jeremy Bailenson headed up a team of researchers from Stanford's Human Interaction Lab, and they published a paper titled Non-Verbal Overload, a theoretical argument for the causes of Zoom fatigue. Now, in this article, they actually found 4 key reasons for Zoom fatigue. Number 1, excessive amounts of close-up eye contact. So typically, if you're in a face-to-face meeting, you're sitting at least 1 meter or more from everyone else. But when you're sitting on a Zoom call, you might be half a meter from someone's face, especially if you've maximized the Zoom screen. Now that can be quite awkward for us as human beings. I mean, imagine standing, say, 40 centimeters from someone's eyes in the face-to-face world and just staring at them without batting an eyelid.
You ever see that scene in Scanners when that dude's head blew up?
That's obviously very uncomfortable, but also very cognitively draining. Now, the researchers actually found that doing so actually presents us with what is a much more intense cognitive experience. Number 2, seeing yourself on camera is fatiguing. Now, imagine someone was following you around all day with a mirror. That's a little bit like what a Zoom call is. We tend to spend too much time focusing on ourselves, our appearance, how we look, what people think about how we look, all that sort of stuff, instead of focusing on the speaker. Now, this can be really draining for people who are perhaps more self-conscious than others, but also for people who are, say, we'll call them less self-conscious than others, like this person, it can also be quite draining. Number 3, video calls dramatically reduce our usual mobility. Now, typically, if I am on, say, a phone call, I can walk while I talk, I can be in the gym, I can be in the car, I can be doing any manner of things. But when I'm taking a Zoom call with the video on, typically I need to be in one spot. I need to be behind my desktop or I need to be behind my phone. Typically, I won't be walking while I take that Zoom call. At least I don't advise so, because if your brain, your eyes, your ears are all occupied, perhaps walking down a busy city street isn't really what you want to be doing in that instance. Number 4, cognitive load is higher on video calls than face-to-face conversations. Now, interpersonal communication experts find that about 70% of communication is nonverbal. But when we're on a Zoom call, it's hard to pick up on nonverbal cues. We have to work extra hard to pick up on any that may be present, but at the same time, if there are none present or few present, we need to work extra hard to kind of figure out or decipher what people actually mean. So now that we're all fatigued after spending the last 20 or so months taking Zoom calls, let's get into the solutions around what we can do to beat Zoom fatigue. Number 1, get out of full screen mode and sit further back from your screen. That's too close. Now, typically you should be sitting about a meter back from your screen if possible. Now, if you're working off your laptop, that's simply not going to be possible, which is why when working from home, it's important to have, say, an extended keyboard, perhaps your laptop up on a riser so that it is at eye level and you're not staring down, which isn't going to be great for your neck, by the way. And that way you can create some more distance between yourself and the screen. Of course, if you have an extended monitor, that's another way to create some distance between yourself and other people or other digital people in a Zoom call. Number 2, hide self-view. Of course, this might be difficult for some of us. I'm not talking about myself, of course, but hiding self-view just takes the focus off yourself and lets you focus on the speaker. Number 3, use audio-only calls where possible. For whatever reason, we've defaulted to leaving video on in all Zoom calls, and I understand why that's the case. It's the default setting. It's a video conferencing tool. But we don't need to have the video on. And if we turn the video off, well, it empowers us to take those calls walking, in the car, or wherever we happen to be. It gives us a lot more flexibility, and it also decreases the cognitive intensity of those calls. And of course, if it's just a two-person call, well, we don't need Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Hangouts for that. We can simply pick up the phone and have a good old-fashioned phone call. Number 4, turn away from the screen from time to time. In a typical face-to-face meeting, we're not constantly staring at someone, in the face, in the eyes. We're looking away, we're staring down at our notes, at the table, perhaps the artwork on the wall, and we should endeavor to do the same during a Zoom call, like to look away from the screen from time to time. That's going to help us decrease the cognitive intensity of constantly staring at someone's face. And number 5, and perhaps most importantly, most meetings don't need to happen, so don't have a Zoom call unless you really need to. So many people defaulted to having Zoom calls for the sake of it. Let's have a Zoom call. Let's have a Zoom call. So much so that during the pandemic, we saw so many people posting selfies with like 20 people up on the screen. I dare say at least 16 of those people didn't need to be there. And in lieu of this, we're missing out on time invested into more important work. So don't have a Zoom call unless you really need to. And in fact, don't have a meeting unless you really need to. That includes those 1-hour meetings interstate and overseas where someone gets to spend $10,000 on a business class flight and 5-star hotels for no apparent reason. And if you'd like to learn more about this topic, I actually published an episode last week called The 5 Levels of Remote Work, which unpacks how we go about remote work beyond simply downloading Zoom and beyond simply downloading Slack. But if you'd like to get really good at remote work, I published an ebook called the Remote Working Playbook. It's about 60 pages long, and you can download that absolutely free at steveglaveski.com/downloads. There will be a link in the show notes for you as well. Now, if I can leave you with anything, it's this. Life is simply too short to spend all day, every day in back-to-back Zoom calls. With that, I'm out of here.